My journey started at Jomo Kenyatta University of Agriculture and Technology, where I studied my Bachelor of Architecture degree, graduating in the year 2004. And one of the things that stood out quite key at this university is learning for the architectural profession is actually quite tactile and interactive. And that already sets you up for the market, or at least understanding how architecture in the field works. One of the other things I also noted is that even for the units that are not design related, the teaching was actually quite involving. The lecturers would actually actively engage us to be able to understand at a better perspective. I remember one of those units, we did a unit called geology, and we had an interesting lecturer who took us all the way out to Matu. Yeah, so he was dictating notes while we were sitting on the sedimentary rocks as we learned about them. So that level of interactive learning, I think, already set me up to having greater interest in architecture. Because then you get to understand that architecture is not simply a sitting in the office and you produce some work. It's going out there, understanding people's needs and understanding materials, understanding, providing solutions that are appropriate for any one place, any people, and then going back to review to see has that solution actually worked. One of the other things that was quite key is that we had to do industrial attachments. And that also, and I think we used to start at around second year. You would be given log sheets and you're told you go, and for 2 months, make sure you've worked with an office that's registered or that's interacting with the building industry to be able to actually learn something. And that was important, because in that period I got to work with architects, I got to work with NGOs working in the slums. And each of these offices I was able to learn something. I learned about architecture, I learned about working with community-based organizations, I learned about materials, because you start to explore that level. And then when you go back to class, you start to understand what you're taught a lot better. So that was my beginning of architecture. And as I said, I graduated in 2004. And for a short while, I got to work with Tile and Carpet Center. That's doing design to sell products, which was a different dimension, because it was more interacting with the products and seeing how the clients can then put them in their buildings for them to be able to sell the products that you've just put in that design. So that was a different way of doing architecture. I, however, moved on, not long, it wasn't there too long, and I moved on to Dimensions Architects and interior designers. So there I was also able to now work on quite a number of projects. I think the key projects that I worked on there was with the Kenya Red Cross and Africa Online. After leaving Architects, we left the country as a family, and we moved on to London for 2 years. So when we were in London, I got to work for a company in Southfields in London. And there the experience was quite interesting, because London, they did quite a bit of rehabilitation work and quite a bit of modernizing Victorian houses. So it's modernizing the interior while conserving the exterior of these buildings. From there, we moved on to Dubai for another 2 years, and I worked with a lady, she's called Sumaya Daba, in Daba Architects. She was RIBA registered architect, and that was a different experience as well, because then it's a different setup, a lot more modern than what London was in terms of projects, but also giving me some type of an international feel to architecture, which when we came back to the country at the end of 2009, I knew exactly the company I wanted to pursue. And that was based on the very good story of Triad, the legacy of Triad of delivery of good projects. So I was very, very clear that Triad is a company I wanted to work with. And when you go back, I think it was December 2009, I interviewed and started working in Triad in 2010. So my interest in architecture started, it's by curiosity. Because I remember when I was very, very young, you know how you start school way back, we'd start with nursery school. I think that was before all these PP1, PP2s, and you do like 7 years before you go to year 1. So in nursery school where we lived, I grew up in Nanyuki. And when we lived, the school, I went to public school nearby. But the year I started school, that school needed to be repaired. So the school was moved. It wasn't a big school then. So the entire school, the students were moved to the area MP's holiday home. So my start of school, because that was a tiny nursery school class, our class was in an old wooden gazebo outside the house. Now that start of education, it was like heaven for a child, because you know a gazebo, it has no door, it has no windows. When you're inside, you're also outside. You can just swing your legs and you're outside. So it was an interesting way to do learning, and I think to some extent a little bit of a lie to me, because when I moved on to class 1 and went back to the mainstream public school, the class was closed, it had windows and there was a door. So I remember that class teacher came in the first day and then he shut the door, and I wondered what's wrong with that. Classrooms are supposed to be open where I can just leave break time and go home and not come back. So that starting to look at why is this different from what I interacted with, and being a public school, everything was a 3rd grade, so the floor was grey screen, the walls were the typical public school, and then had started from a holiday home, so that looked different. Then I'd go home and that also looked different. So it started a curiosity to starting to understand why is everything looking different, and why is it in every place there's a different feeling. So that was my start of curiosity, which sort of moved on, and I still continued to be curious, and that's how I ended up doing architecture. So 2010, I joined the company. And as usual, the culture of Triad is such that you come in, well, luckily at the point when I was coming in, I was already a registered architect. So you come in and you're thrown deep end. So you're given a project and it becomes your responsibility to really run with that project, learn quickly on the how Triad way of doing the projects happens. And then you work the project yourself. And that I can say is a plus in a lot of ways. Plus also another experience I had collected both locally and internationally. I think that helps quite a bit for me to be able to plug in quite substantially. And the reason it was also easy to settle is because even much as I'd worked internationally, the standards and the way of doing work, we are very British based. So it didn't really vary when I left. It's the same way that we produce work, that work is produced out there is also the way we're able to. So we have an international feel to how we do our work. And I think that sort of placed me in quite quick into settling into Triad and being able to produce quite a bit of projects. Now, that was 2010, and by 2012, I think by mid-2012, I made associates. And my first role outside of doing projects, being a project architect, was in charge of our quality management system, which is certified by ISO. So by being in charge of that, it means making sure that everybody understands it and making sure that we continue to retain our certification for that quality management system. So that was my key role when it came to starting to take up leadership in Triad. That is something I continued with because by June 2013, I was invited to join, to become a partner. That's the time one of the directors, all the directors was retiring. His name was Tim Volkard. So I took up shareholding through that invitation, and I've been building that since. So that's how I became a partner in Triad. I don't think in architecture there's such a thing as a typical day. And I'll tell you why. Because every project has its own requirements. And sometimes you'll work on about 3 projects or 4 projects at the same time. And they're all at different stages. So it could be there'll be a project where you're starting to design, or you're starting to have meetings with the client on one project. So you may start with a meeting with the client to understand their needs, in which case then you're also reviewing drawings for a project that's probably being detailed. So there's no such thing as a typical day when you're doing architecture, yeah? But there's such a thing as typical processes when you're producing work in architecture. So clients in Triad, we start off really, and that's what I was just stating, that you start by understanding their requirements in terms of what product do you want, what kind of service do you want out of Triad. And out of Triad, we have quite a number of services that we offer. So is it in architecture, is it interior design, is it project management, is it master planning? So what kind of product or service do you want out of Triad? So from that understanding is also now getting into the details of where is your land, because or facility where this project is going to be delivered, because I mean all projects sit on some property. So that's always the first point of understanding. 1, client requirements. 2, where is that project going to be done? And then now from there we work out what kind of project is it, and therefore what kind of contracting when it comes to consultancy do we need to get into to be able to offer the service. For one, no, you're right that this profession, people associate the word architect or the word engineer with men. In fact, I was just telling my colleague here that it's very common. You accept to be called Bwana Architect, which is very common. You go to site, you're leading a site meeting and telling Bwana Architect, keep being referred to a Bwana Architect. So it's common. And a lot of the times I say those are kind of the things, they're just biases by association, really. I say you'll never meet, it's very rare that in your profession you'll actually meet a bad person. So you have to be very careful how you take it. When someone calls you Bwana Architect, they really don't mean any harm. It's just how they have taken the profession, really. But what I tell women in this profession is that know your stuff, yeah? So the process of delivering a project is a process of delivering a project. There's no process that is for women and there's no process that is for men, yeah? When it comes to producing work or producing design or producing details and drawings or interacting with a client, there's no gender to that. So what counts is that you know how to do your work, yeah? That counts more than the fact that I'm this gender or I'm that gender. And I think as you interact with people, they over time, it's starting to wash away quite a bit, because I think in the beginning, when we were in school, we were only 3 of us in a class of 21. But I think if you go to universities today, it's almost 50-50. So it's a dynamic that's starting to change. And for me, sitting in Triad as a first woman, after 50 years in Triad, that's the first time we got a female director. I think for me, it's mentoring by being, yeah? Just be a good architect, just be a good leader, just be, without over-articulating like, hey, I'm female, so hey, look at me now. It's do your work and do it right, so that they who are coming after you know that it's possible. And it's just attitudes and perspectives. It's not really your capacity as a person to do the work. Right, yeah. So I think I started off by indicating that Tile and Carpenter was a different swing where we're doing materials, retail and design combined. But as I moved on to Dimensions Architects, I did some projects with Kenya Red Cross, and that was both a touch of architecture and interiors, which was quite interesting because that was the beginning of now the interaction with clients. But as I moved on to the UK, the capacity to work in inner London, where they're very, very protective of their streetscapes. So being able to modernize those Victorian houses to be modern on the inside, both retail and residential, while conserving the street facade look of the building. That was an interesting way of working project. And I did a couple of those projects in inner London, that modernizing of buildings. The other thing that was quite key was responsiveness to climate. They have summer, they have winter. And just being able to understand the U value of materials and how that impacts loss of heat during winter was key. The technology or the way they do their walls, incorporating the cavity walling and all that, because of the climate aspect, is something that's a tad different from how we do architecture here. So that was an interesting way of doing the project. So when I moved on to Dubai, so I did a mid-level commercial building and a whole lot of residentials. And I think just about when I was leaving, I did some residential units, about 786 of them. It was a master plan of residential units in Abu Dhabi. So a lot of projects. In fact, this was like the smaller projects in Dubai. Dubai has a way of getting quite big. But being able to work in a very transient kind of an environment, that's also quite fast-paced, without having to break away from the system of doing things. Already I was working with RIBA registered architects. So in terms of process, it's pretty much the same. But in terms of response to climate as well, it reversed. Because now this you had to keep the heat out, not conserve the heat in as you were doing in London. So that flip in being climate responsive as you do buildings it was one of the very good lessons. And I think even as I came back to the country with that experience, I came to realize how we have it. We have it quite good here. We are blessed in so many ways when it comes to climate. Because here you can pretty much, with good orientation, with passive strategies, you can pretty much be good. Is work your big windows as long as your orientation is right. Work your big windows, keep the windows open, deal with the mosquitoes when they come. Yeah, and therefore we have no excuse when you're doing architecture in Kenya for not being climate responsive. So when I came back to the country, one of my projects, which I know I'll never forget for having worked on it as a project architect, is Kericho Cathedral, the Catholic Cathedral in Kericho. It's a massive project, but it's very, very simple in form, but present nonetheless. But it's the intricacies of the detailing of that cathedral and the authenticity of the materials that's quite key. And also being able to work in a multicultural, because the project team was a collaboration with some UK architects, John McCaslan of the UK. So that collaborative working, which is something that's very key in Triad. We do quite a bit of collaboration to be able to deliver a lot of good value. Look at a whole lot of our very, very big international projects. There's quite a bit of that collaboration coming in. So working in that setup was actually good. And it's one of the projects I know Triad are very, very proud of. Lately, I've also worked with ICRAF. ICRAF is World Agroforestry Center, and also being able to work with an existing campus. It's always been a Triad. It was actually done by Triad in 1980, way before my time. A previous director actually sat on it when it was starting. But being able to continue in an existing campus, extending that legacy of Triad within that campus, and still doing it. We have a proposed project and still going on in that campus. It's something that I'm quite happy with. So I've also worked with many other brands. I've worked with World Bank. May not give you a lot of the details, but in terms of the entire office space and everybody they're hosting there. So IFC, BRD, we worked with those, the UN, and many other brands when it comes to putting out their brand expressions in their retail facilities and their offices. So worked with CBA and then became NCBA, worked with Britam, worked with Coop Bank, Standard Chartered. There are quite a collection of those, BAT, KMRC, Microsoft. Yeah, there's quite a list of commercial financial brands that I've gotten to. I'm happy to have gotten to work with while I'm here at Triad. When it comes to industrial, just finished a project in Naivasha for Kentegra. You know, Kentegra, the beauty of doing architecture is being able to connect with the story of the impact way back into the value chain. So they process pyrethrum, which is something, pyrethrum used to be in this country, but then the production sort of stopped and they're starting to revive that. So they impact way back to the farmer by being able to provide a market for a cash crop such as that is something you connect with even when you're just doing the architecture of a factory. So that's one of the other projects that we completed just last year. And then there's an office block in Kilimani, it's called the Act Place. Yeah, and several others, but that's to mention a couple of those. Equity Bank is one of the other brands who we have worked with, and that's both the office at the Britam Tower and the rollout of branches both in Kenya and in DRC. Yeah, so one of the big ones, even before I get to the AI, is sustainability. Yeah, being climate conscious. And as I said, in Kenya, when it comes to climate, we really have no excuses. We really can't get it right, with or without certification. So compliance to green architecture is something we really need to focus on. And as Triad, I'm one of the EDGE experts here. So IFC EDGE is one of the tools for green building certification. But more so beyond certification, just making sure that you do the project right the first time. Yeah. One of the other items, as you've touched on AI, there's quite fast development in technology. Yeah. So here we use the Autodesk suite, of which Revit is part of it. And that's being able to work with BIM. That's building information modeling, where all the full project data is incorporated. Now AI is the other dimension to this, and AI, what that does, or the input into architecture, is being able to do a whole lot of exploration of ideas, and quickly, because once you've done the initial analysis, remember, you listen to the client, you look at the land or the facilities that they have to be able to analyze on what would be the best possible solution. Now, the exploration of solutions is something now AI comes in, and that's very early in the project. I think that would come in at something like stage 2 to be able to explore that. However, it does not cover the entire process of the project. I think we have gone out and detailed the process of doing a project. So AI will come in where you're generating the many ideas in terms of the look, the form, and all that, making work quite a lot more efficient at that stage of the work. You still have to go through the full detailing of the project. You still have to go to site and manage contractors. You still have to do a lot more in terms of that. So being able to pick that and interact with it at being efficient in production or exploration of ideas, design ideas early on in the project is something that's starting to come in. Someone was asking me the other day, so you're an architect, you're the people being replaced by AI. And I was like, no, yeah, it's a pretty good tool, just like the way you have all the other tools that we work with. And being able to look at it as such means you have an easy integration with it, as opposed to looking at it as an enemy. Yeah. So beyond that is and I think from a business angle, in architecture, business does just as well as the economy is doing. So your guess is as good as mine of how Kenya is doing today, and that's a perspective you'll get from just about anyone in the industry. So at Triad, what we're doing, and as I see it right now, I serve as part of business development, is expanding beyond the borders of Kenya into DRC, Rwanda, South Sudan, and Uganda. They also have their own touch of volatility when it comes to political setup, but it still feel, in a way, they still a whole lot of potential for growth. Yeah, so for us being able to go beyond borders is one of the things we are looking at that. Now, architecture, when it comes to people, is another trend that you probably notice in architecture. The nature of the demographic keeps shifting. We are all very aware of the interesting nature of the Gen Zs today. So those Gen Zs are also in the workplace. Yes, you can point at my colleague there, she's a Gen Z. So yeah, so they're also in workplaces. And the generations will continue to change. It's also the demographic in terms of the cultural mix as well. So today, you will not do any bathrooms without providing for the shataf. It's called the Arabic shataf in those bathrooms. Being able to be very, very inclusive when it comes to cultural setups that you get to design is one of the moves that you have to be very, very conscious of. There's been a whole lot of talk of the changing workplace, mostly driven by the needs of today's workforce, of today's people. And the talk of flexible workplace, where I'm able to come pick a desk, any desk, because technology allows for that. Yeah, so flexible working, I can work from home, and therefore workspace are also shrinking. There's a lot more efficiency when it comes to workplace design. So there are those shifts that are related to both technology and the character of the demographic. Now, in terms of the global perspective, you'll also notice that brands keep renewing their look and their expressions, their spaces, and all that. So it's because we are opening up a lot more to the globe. I can be sitting here and I can view a whole thing going on in Russia. So the client today, and where a client can be a corporate, or can even be a person, they are a whole lot more aware in terms of the global perspectives, in terms of spaces, placemaking, and how they want to live. So being able to incorporate those global perspectives into design is something that cannot be ignored. And one of the ways also is that design is getting to be a whole lot more collaborative. Yeah? So you collaborate with your clients because they're coming already collected. They've collected a whole collection of ideas. We've had clients who have worked in here and they've already generated ideas from AI. Or I was sent this image by my cousin in South Africa, or I visited my other cousin in Malaysia and I saw this. So you get that coming in, and therefore design gets to be very collaborative. Instead of I'm looking at your perspective and I'm incorporating the knowledge that we have in terms of making sure that those aspirations come to play. So designing, putting the people at the center of design is something that's becoming more and more important. Now, when it comes to smaller architecture or small buildings, like you're building a bungalow in Ruiru, there's a lot of DIY. Yeah, so anyone goes online and downloads a plan, and everybody knows a guy. I know a guy who can build. Everybody will tell you I know a guy, and there's always a fundi who builds for the neighbor. And since it's just a basic bungalow, there are a lot of DIY going on in the market. Because of that, easy access to information, and easy access to be able to buy materials. If you go on Instagram today, you can buy toilets and handles and all types of things, because everybody is selling in the digital space. So there's a lot of DIY happening at the small scale architecture level. When it comes to homes. And in fact, if you go to cement manufacturers, they'll tell you a lot of the cement that they sell happens in the local hardware. It's sold by the bag and half a bag and a wheelbarrow. And that's a bulk of what they sell, because there's a lot of people building at that level. So, and that's also sort of driven, the kind of wealth of capacity is also driven by the fact that the universities nowadays are generating a whole lot of architects and engineers and QSs and building industry, and I think the courses are even a lot more than we used to know. So there's a lot of these people coming out in the market, and at that level they're able to gig and do a bungalow from the bedroom next door. So there's a lot of that happening in the market. But I think my advice would be to anyone, before you start, just make sure that you're getting good advice, because it's good to get it right the first time. Any construction, however small, is quite capital intensive, and you don't want to go wrong and then you're having to lose money while trying to correct it. But still, it's a good move in the fact that people have access to a lot more information when it comes to being able to do it for themselves. Now, approach overall to architecture cannot be static. It has never been static. As you see, shifts will keep coming. And as an architectural firm, or as an architect, even as a person, you need to keep abreast with what's happening in the market. And more so, it goes beyond generation of an expressionist art form. You have to understand costs. You have to understand cost versus the value that the client gets, so that you're able to deliver maximum value to the client for the money that they put in as capital into that real estate asset. Then there's also understanding of lifetime costs. If I put up an office block for you, what will it cost me in terms of running that office? Because you need to be conscious of it when you're doing the design, so that when it comes to running that office into its life, what are those costs that this client is going to incur? And therefore, being very, very resource-wise efficient in terms of design is very key. I mentioned about being able to draw value way back to the value chain, to knowing whatever it is that you're putting up has an effect to the value chain way back. So, and being able to understand that is important. I think being of value and service to the community. So, everybody may look at architecture as just a business, but I'll also look at it from a broader perspective as a service to the community. Because beyond what you make business with and being able to produce that architecture you get paid for, how do you feed into society as a general? And one of the things that makes me quite happy in Triad is that we have a structure for that through Triad Foundation. And with Triad Foundation, we've been able to interact with a lot of communities. I think for this year, we'll be doing our 12th Triad Foundation projects. Just picking a part of the community, then working with them to be able to deliver value and giving them what we have. And what we have is technical expertise. So we're able to give that to provide a solution in that sense. And I'm told this year we'll probably be doing a project for mothers in prison who are incarcerated with their babies. So the mother is the one who is in prison, but why is the baby? Because it allows for 0 to 4 years. So why is the baby in prison? And therefore, can that setup be improved? But also doing that project, it's not just that spot where you work with, it's teaching that community that it's possibility for better.